Hi everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry about the setup. This genuinely is as good as it gets. This is my whitest background and I have a wall directly to my left, and so this is about as much of the mosquito net as I could cut out, so I apologise for that. And it is hotter than hot. So I wonder how that compares to the weather in London right now. I'm going to jump right in because I know that you will have a jam-packed day and I'm going to try not to overrun too much, but there is a lot to be said. And the first thing I wanted to say, just to keep this in mind, because there's a wonderful tendency that particularly states, but everyone has, to use language to obfuscate. And I think there's something that we have to constantly remind ourselves. There's something very, not just sterile, but safe sounding about the word intelligence, which is misleading. Artificial it may be, but intelligent compared to other technology, perhaps. Intelligence, I think, in the way that it conjures up a sense of reliability in people's minds, almost implies a sense of a clinical ability to be correct, to make good judgments beyond a human being's capacity. And I think when we get into the flaws inherent in the tech and many other conflating issues, it is simply not the case. This is not intelligence we are dealing with. And I think when we hear intelligence, we have to actually think functionality. This is just machines that have been programmed to fulfill a function, that have a capacity, and it can self-learn to an extent, but even then within the limits and with several flaws within the limits of those that programmed the machines. And so on that note, Erin Hunt of Minds Action Canada points out that 0.0004% of the world's population has the technical ability to develop AI, which I think we can agree is an extremely elite and exclusive group. Wired asserts that 12% of those leading researchers working on AI are women. Now, taking that just as a sample, because it's the only figures we have, 12% of 0.0004 is 0.000048. I'm not comfortable having to round up to the fifth decimal place of a percentage point before women appear as a noticeable integer, as being part of the development of weapons which may disproportionately harm them. Now, when the images of white males are more prevalent, as well as the coders implementing and feeding the machine learning with data, making the so-called intelligence limited within the parameters of human bias, it makes women of colour the least detectable and the least protectable, as well as all of those with physical difference stepping away from a white male fully abled body norm. When voice recognition struggles to identify voices that are not North American, we have to remind ourselves most conflicts are not being waged over North America. And we know that faces cannot be, despite assertions, accurately deciphered and through triangulations of data for mood, expression or intent, or even because in the instances of racial and gender and other biases, whether or not they're a person. We already have mistakes made and civilian casualties and targets based simply on age, gender, race and behaviour, and then named enemy combatants. The biases that are built in will not only be inherent, will not only exacerbate existing issues, they will become hyperbolic and unmonitorable. The machine will not be able to communicate with the programmer the mistakes that it is making. It may not even understand it's making mistakes. Now, to abbreviate the issue profoundly and to draw somewhat of a cartoon image of this, In the instance of image recognition, for example, 1 million images may be fed into this program, and the machine may come to recognize a collection of aggregated data points that are merely information which it understands to represent something like a ship. And it learns over millions of data that's fed into it its own understanding of ship. It doesn't have a qualitative understanding of ship. When I see a ship, I can make out a ship, and it could have all sorts of interesting additions and deformities from the norm of what a ship would look like, and I could still pick out a ship. A machine probably could not. But it has no way of telling the programmer what it is understanding to mean ship, to read ship, to target ship, or school, or person, or child. And so in war, the noisiest, most chaotic environment there is, what happens when, say, one of the triangulating pieces of data is, and I'm drawing a cartoon image here, the length or height of a mast, and that mast becomes a telecoms tower or a flagpole on an embassy? What happens when an aircraft carrier becomes confused with an airport? Now, it's not just what it understands to be a ship when it's clinically in front of it. It's mixed with all the other information. So when something else it understood separately comes into contact with the ship, it may not just confuse one with the other, it may disappear them altogether, or confuse them with entirely different things. And then how is it to recognize an enemy ship from an allied ship, and a targetable ship, and a ship that may engage, and a ship that may not? So legal questions aside, it doesn't even know what a ship is. In this case, it's not just the mistakes. It's not just that we could not correct them because we simply would not know what to correct. The troubling part is, which is the challenge to the assertion that current law and voluntary Article 36 reviews and Martin's laws, the Martin's Law clause, are enough, is this. Whether a machine tests well enough to pass some procurement qualifiers in the clean environment of a lab with whatever success rate lawyers and states have deemed are acceptable, and even though that predictability and accuracy will severely diminish in the noise and chaos of war, not to mention the added unknown of meeting other machines with their own data modelling, but that not knowing the structure they are hitting is not the structure they intend to hit, because they don't know they are making a mistake, because this is not intelligence, it is a function which has been programmed, which is feeding off of its own program and its own pre-fed preconceptions, embedded within its own understanding, which we don't know what it has taken to be understood. They could still log those hits, which were mistakes, as accurate, as on target, as lawful. And this could be used to tell the public back home that everything is fine. There are no body bags coming home because we're not sending our troops in, and the reports are coming back fully accurate and all is well. And it could be used by weapons developers to willingly or unwittingly pass weapons that they know are not as safe as testing suggests, and so they will pass Article 36 reviews, but not comply with law. So we understand that women will be disproportionately harmed. And women have worked to create transformative agendas around peace for years, and the transformative agenda of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, of the SDGs, of Women's Peace and Security, of the Arms Trade Treaty, of the TPNW, of disarmament language in general, and law in general, and then have to repeatedly reclaim and restate that language and the space as it shrinks under the usurpation by states that would dilute it with their stagnant, their lack of vision, and their attempts to absorb it within the ineffectiveness for their own agenda. Now, with AI specifically, there are claims, and this is part of the absorption I'm talking about, that these would eliminate the risk of rape. But rape as a tool of war, rape in most instances, is merely an instrument of bodily harm and trauma and humiliation. It is utterly within the clinical capacity of a machine which understands it is to cause harm. A machine which is programmed perhaps to cause everything but death might understand blunt trauma. The alleviating thinking that machines don't have sexual desire, therefore will not rape, leans into the deliberate misthinking that rape is about sexual desire and therefore it will not happen here. It is about violence. It is about domination, humiliation, wielding of control, abuse, and many, many other things. It's not just in conflict, but in areas of all power disparity. Wherever there is authority over another, there is risk of violation, abuse of that authority, and penetration of any kind. Where there is civil unrest, border control, protests, demonstrations, it happens to children and it happens to men. And so this zenith weaponry of toxic masculinity, which will affect men and does affect men, because this dispassionate idea of alienation of the human from its humanity affects us all. To kill without risk to self, without empathy for the ending of a life or the cause of pain, to kill without consequence, without impunity, seems to rather distance the human from the act, which is exactly an argument for these weapons, it seems, and yet also the state from its part in that act, which is to counter basic tenets of international law as well as basic tenets of moral judgment, and dare one say it, soul. States, parties and individuals are responsible to their actions during armed conflict. IHL and LOAC is applicable to them, not the machines that they engage. To fail to ensure unambiguous legal understandings of meaningful human control through development to engagement stages will potentially remove state accountability and the ability to apply international criminal law altogether. Those principles are explored within the CCW draft report, the draft report on laws from earlier this year, and it's stated that these guiding principles should be affirmed as principles, as laid out in the Chair's Annex 1. But this is the most basic precursor to a ban's legal coding terminology. And while it's stunning that even though control in the end is a patriarchal illusion, accountability and responsibility, legal and moral, which affect judgment and the ease with which states go to war and individuals decide to act in harm or choose not to, are fundaments of international law, international human rights law, and human rights. It seems that by creating these dispassionate killing machines, it's not an attempt to remove extra harm or confusion, but an attempt to distance from the very responsibility and legal accountability that holds us all in check. And the empathy that makes taking a life so difficult is the empathy that keeps us human. Beyond the fact that it could enable regimes to clinically order mass murder and claim accident, and repeat the ethnic cleansings that led to the concretizing of customary law into international law that we have today, which holds states responsible for war crimes and individual commands within it, therefore requiring traceable chain of command, it goes to the very heart of who we are. Because if we don't do this before it's too late, and a preemptive ban is the only ban that will mean anything, because this is downloadable tech, it is cheap, hackable tech, which you can put into cheap kit. If we don't do this now, there is no retrospective closing of Pandora's box. Now, 2 final words. Coming from an area I was just in, which has been devastated by its own civil unrest, The vehicles there are laden with the artillery and the warfare that the war machines that we have built in big, powerful states and sold to them. And it says on the side of the weapons, made in fill in blank here. And this woman said to me, your first world weapons in third world countries. These weapons, these wars are not fought in our own territories. They are fought elsewhere. And in that elsewhere, those people that will be the most vulnerable will be the first to be harmed. And that is something that we have to ethically consider, we have to morally consider, and we have to bear the legal weight of. Now, when software developers are having to behave as conscientious objectors in the workplace, if we can't at least agree on the very definitions, or to have definitions on meaningful human control, we really have to look again at the very root of what it is to be meaningfully human. I want to leave today on a positive and active note, because there's a lot of wordage and a lot of discussion and debate around change and activism and forward thinking in the chatosphere and online, and hope is good, but it can also be breathless and passive, because the bridge between the vision of tomorrow and manifesting it requires physically building it. And that takes strategy, tenacity, collaboration without ego, and grit and stamina. And it's often a thankless task. And it's something that we simply must do because there is no other option. And so the thought that I would like to leave you with is that under Marissa's excellent and effervescent lead, I hope that as much as you will debate and discuss, because all of those things are necessary to decide what issues are important, which details need to be illuminated, and what the strategies are, I hope that you plan action and not just aspiration. And so on that note, I leave you in her brilliant and capable hands, and I wish you all a fantastic London day, and take care. Thank you.